So we haven't done a game week review in quite a while. We usually do these every week, but the reason for that was because it was the festive period and there was literally game weeks every other day, so I never really had the chance to talk about the games. However, there is now a little bit of a Premier League winter break, so I thought it would be a good time to reflect back on the festive period and talk about each team as a whole. So that's what we're doing. I'm ranking them out of 10, 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, based on their festive period. Now, what do I mean by the festive period? So it is games between the 21st of December to the 2nd of January, because in those 13 days, 3 game weeks were played, so most teams played 3 games in these 13 days, and I'm going to be ranking them based on their results in these games. So, let me know, what would you rank your team out of 10 in the comments below, and let's begin. So, we start with the 10 out of 10s, we're going to go lower and lower as we go. So, in the 10 out of 10s, we have Wolves. The only team to take 9 points from a possible 9 was one that few would have predicted before the festive football kicked off. With wins over Chelsea, Brentford and Everton, Gary O'Neill's Wolves topped the festive form books. In doing so, they significantly improved their chances of finishing higher up the table. Wolves scored more goals, 9, than any other team during this period, having created chances worth 5.6 expected goals. Their overperformance of 3.3 compared to their XG was almost twice as high as any other team during this period. And this shows just how confident they are under Gary O'Neill and what a superb Christmas they've had. West Ham, having beaten Man United and Arsenal, David Moyes' side then ground out a goalless draw with Brighton, the only real blemish on an incredible festive period. The way West Ham play inevitably means opponents will have chances, simply because they concede so much territory. Across their 3 games, Moyes' side conceded 6.2 XG, the 4th highest of any team, and yet they were the only team that didn't concede a goal during the festive period. Alphonse Areola was a man mountain in the West Ham goal, facing 19 shots, worth a total of 3.4 expected goals, but he kept 3 successive clean sheets. The concern for West Ham is just how little they offered in attack against Brighton, having lost Mohamed Kudus to international duty with Ghana, but besides that, fairly lacklustre game versus Brighton, wins versus Man United and Arsenal away gets them a 10 out of 10. Manchester City, despite only playing 2 games, having had their match against Brentford postponed due to their involvement in the Club World Cup, Manchester City were in many ways the biggest winners from the festive period. They won their 2 domestic games fairly convincingly and watched Arsenal tumble down to 4th, while Liverpool and unlikely title challengers Aston Villa also dropped points. City's chances of retaining the Premier League title rose dramatically over the festive period, and they also became world champions in mid-December, and they are also one of only 3 Premier League teams who will not lose a single player to either the African or Asian tournaments that will be played in the coming weeks. So it was a pretty good December for Pep Guardiola and co. On to the 9 out of 10s. We have Luton. It's been an incredible festive period for the relegation candidates Luton, who picked up an impressive 6 points from a possible 9. They kicked off with a fantastic 1-0 victory over Newcastle, and then picked up arguably their most important win of the season, beating Sheffield United 3-2. Not only was this their first ever Premier League away win, but it was a win over fellow relegation favourites, and really boosted their confidence while shattering Sheffield's. They ended up losing their last game, but that was to Chelsea, and they did go out swinging, almost grabbing something dramatically. Luton greatly improved their chances of survival this festive period it's just less than a 10 out of 10, as they did have that loss in these 3 games, but still, it's been great. A 3-2 win versus Forest was incredibly spectacular, especially considering they had a new manager bounce, and as we will get on to, Nuno has done very well since taking over at Forest. They then scored 3 again, this time comfortably beating Fulham, but then in their final game they were the ones conceding 3 versus Spurs. Now it is Spurs away, a very difficult game, so I'll give them a pass, but that just knocks them from getting a 10 out of 10. However, what a month it's been for Iraiola's side. Now we move on to the 8 out of 10s. Starting off with Liverpool. Title challengers, Liverpool won twice and drew to Arsenal in a pretty successful period. This festive period also saw them produce arguably their best performance of the season versus Newcastle, posting an incredible 7.1 XG, which was the biggest on record since 2010-11 by a team in a single game, and by some distance too. They end the festive period top of the league, but the only reason they drop some points on the ratings is because of the serious-looking injuries suffered by Dominic Szoboszlai and Kostas Tsimikas in the period, and the draw versus Arsenal, which was a game they maybe could have won considering the chances they had, and also how Arsenal have performed since, but still impressive period for them. Nottingham Forest. At the other end of the table, Nottingham Forest's decision to stack Steve Cooper and bring in Nuno looks like it might have paid off already. With back-to-back wins over top 4 hopefuls Newcastle and Man United, Forest massively increased their chances of avoiding relegation over the festive period. The only disappointment was Nuno's first game, losing at home to Bournemouth, but besides that, it's been impeccable. The 7 out of 10s now, we have Brighton. Brighton returned to the old Brighton in many ways this festive period, with some sensational and typical Brighton performances. In games versus Palace and West Ham, they created bucket loads of chances, yet scored just 1 goal, a typical Brighton conversion rate. They also created a bucket load of chances versus Spurs and should have scored 8. They did score 4 in the end, but that was a very, very impressive win over Spurs. They end the period unbeaten with some great performances, maybe a little less points than they deserve though, but overall, major improvement on their earlier form. Now, we move on to the 6 out of 10s, kicking off with Crystal Palace. Palace ended their 9-game winless run this Christmas/New Year, beating Brentford in a must-win game. They came from behind to impressively win 3-1, and in their other games showed a lot of promise, only losing to Chelsea to a 90th minute penalty and drawing versus rivals Brighton 1-1 despite being battered in that game. Overall, 4 points from 3 tough games is very good for Palace, who were struggling but seem to have started to pick themselves up a bit. The only concern is they lost Michael Elise, who picked up another injury in the Brentford game. Spurs. It's been an up and down one for Spurs this period. They got 6 points from 9, which is a very solid return. They beat an in-form Everton narrowly and then beat Bournemouth, who were in red-hot form going into that game. So those 2 wins are very impressive. However, their loss to Brighton away was really poor. They were absolutely battered, and while they showed some fight towards the end, it was an abysmal game for Spurs and definitely their worst performance of this season. Nevertheless, 6 points from 9 and wins versus some tough teams who were on form, who many teams have slipped up against this season, is pretty good, so they get a 6. Burnley. Burnley showed signs of improvement this festive period and picked up some confidence for sure. They started off with a sensational 2-0 win away versus Fulham, and then a very poor performance versus Liverpool, but admittedly it's Liverpool, so you can give them a pass. And then despite having 10 men, showed some real grit and fight away versus Villa, and almost snatched a point if it wasn't for a 90th minute penalty. Overall, getting a big win versus Fulham and a fantastic display versus Villa means it's been an encouraging period for Burnley fans. Now we move on to the 5 Chelsea. The festive period has actually been one of Chelsea's better spells during this season, which says it all as they didn't even win all 3 games. Chelsea won 2 out of 3, beating Luton and Crystal Palace, both in pretty dramatic fashion, and then lost to Wolves. The loss to Wolves was pretty awful in terms of the performance, and the Palace and Luton wins were not convincing at all, but nevertheless, a win is a win, and 6 points from a possible 9 is a decent return, and was much needed considering how poor Chelsea have been this season. It's an average 5 out of 10 for the Blues. Fulham. If it wasn't for that Arsenal game, Fulham would have got a 0, but that Arsenal win is safe from here and they get a 5 out of 10. They lost at home to Burnley, which was such a poor loss, and then got smacked up by Bournemouth, but that win versus Arsenal bumps them up to an average score of 5 out of 10. On paper, if you told a Fulham fan in those 3 games you would get 3 points, I think they would be content with it. They probably wouldn't have thought they would lose to Burnley and Bournemouth and then beat Arsenal, but oh well, 3 out of 9 is an average return. So there is no 4 out of 10s. We move to the 3 out of 10s. Aston Villa. It wasn't the best festive period for Unai Emery's Villa, who prior to this were absolutely flying, but their momentum was stunned slightly in these 3 games. 4 points from 9 is a solid return, but a manner of them were quite poor, and it really could have easily been 9 from 9. It took a 90th minute equaliser at home to bottom of the league Sheffield to stop Villa from a shock loss. They then threw away a 2-0 lead versus Man United, and then needed a 90th minute penalty to beat Burnley. Not the best performances against teams who they could have beat, but a decent return of points. But as I said, it could have and probably should have been 9 from 9. Everton. Despite statistically being one of the worst teams in the festive period, Everton, I've cut them some slack and I give them a rating of 3. They lost all 3 games, but when you look at the opposition, it's understandable. They lost away to Spurs, and it was very narrow, 2-1. They could have easily got something from that game. They then lost for champions Man City in a game again, where they could have got something from that, but they did end admittedly in very disappointing 3-0 loss to Wolves. While that Wolves game was abysmal, the others were really good performances, and despite the 3 losses, Everton overall played pretty well versus some really tough opposition in this period. Now, we go on to the 2 out of 10s. Manchester United. To call Man United's season a roller coaster would be to do it somewhat of a disservice. If anyone has been on a ride as up and down as United's season, they would surely be violently ill. And the festive period was the exact same. It started with a damaging 2-0 loss to West Ham, and then a 2-0 first half loss to Aston Villa, but a dramatic comeback that some thought would kickstart their season came incredible, but then it came crashing down again when United suffered their 9th defeat of the season at Nottingham Forest. To rub salt into the wounds, former winger Anthony Elanga was one of the chief string pullers at the City ground, providing the assist for Gibbs White's winner. The only reason it's not a 0 is because they did beat title challenge Aston Villa, with Rasmus Højlund getting a much needed first goal, but besides that, it's been pretty grim. Now we have the 1 out of 10s. Sheffield United. Sheffield United made relegation even more likely by taking only 1 point from a possible 9, and are now almost certain to go down. I will say they had some very tough games though, coming up against Aston Villa and Man City both away, which are 2 games I'm fine with you losing in, but at home to Luton, that loss has destroyed their chances of survival. They do get 1 point though for grabbing something versus Aston Villa, but even then, they should have sorted that out and got all 3. Losing at home to Luton though, that is, I believe, their worst loss of the season, so it's a 1 out of 10. Now we go to the 0 out of 10s. Brentford. Brentford lost heavily to Wolves and then threw away a lead against Crystal Palace to take their total points lost from winning positions this season to 20, 4 more than any other team. The saving grace for Thomas Frank's out of so they only played twice and their father game in hand to come. The only problem is that game in hand is away to Man City, and given they have lost 5 games in a row now, they may not have much hope of repeating their 2-1 win at the Etihad last season. They do have Ivan Toney returning from suspension soon, but they are going to lose players to the AFCON and Asian Cup and are facing a real challenge to stop the slide because it's been a really, really bad festive period. Newcastle, meanwhile, lost 3 games to Luton, Nottingham Forest and Liverpool as their top 4s evaporated, which, if were to happen, would represent an incredibly disappointing season for Eddie Howe's side. The Christmas and New Year period also included a record for Newcastle that they wouldn't want to break, which I mentioned earlier, but I'll repeat again just to emphasise how bad it was. Liverpool racked up a higher expected goals total against them, 7.11, than any other team has managed on record since 2010-11 in a Premier League game. Absolute shambles. And finally, the last 0 out of 10 is Arsenal. So, the biggest losers, arguably from the festive games, were Arsenal, who saw their chances of winning the title drop significantly after they picked up only 1 point from their 3 festive matches. To add to their woes, they also lost Alexander Zinchenko to a calf injury, and Takehiro Tomiyasu is heading off to the Asian Cup. Mikel Arteta will therefore be short of options at left back for the coming weeks. Now, the surprising thing is that the only game they didn't lose in the festive period was by far their toughest, away against Liverpool. While that was a good point, to lose to West Ham at home and then Fulham has basically just erased and voided that Liverpool point, because that has damaged their title hopes so badly. That's a 0 out of 10 for Arteta's side. So there we go. Those were the rankings of every team out of 10 in their festive period. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those rankings. And if you have enjoyed, please leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in another